And I remember when you get to basic training, this is before cell phone days, this is 1998. I remember it was my first time away from home, and I get my first phone call. Till this day, I've never been to jail. Thank you, God, for saving me from those things. I've never been to jail, but I remember having phone booths lined up. They would have phones, and everybody got their phone call to let their parents know that they made it to basic training. And the drill sergeant's just standing like 10 feet, just waiting to like tear you apart, right? So when you get off the phone, I remember grabbing the phone and calling my mom, and here I am. I'm just former gang member off the streets of California, off the streets of Los Angeles, and I get my first phone call to my mom, and I remember as soon as I heard my mom's voice, this lump in my throat, and I just began to like start crying like, Mom. I don't remember if thinking back now, I'm like, did I make the right decision? Because this guy is about to eat me alive, and he's right there standing. I took the ASVAB, I took the test. I failed it the first time. What people don't know is that I failed junior high. I didn't graduate junior high. I was just passed along. I guess California school system stuff. Then in high school, when I went to, I didn't graduate like normal people do across the academic stage. I had to go to summer school after, and there was a teacher's assistant that gave me answers to an exam that I needed. That's how I made it. I was passed along in junior high, and I cheated to get through high school. Then here I am taking this ASVAB. You got to score a 30. I scored a 29. I had failed so many things in my life during that time academically. So I go back sometime later, I take the test again, and I score a 31. I wasn't hitting on all cylinders. I hope you hear me say that. I complete basic training. I ended up going to they called AIT, Advanced Individual Training, and that's where you actually learn the job that you're gonna do for the military. For me, it was truck driving. I chose truck driving, well, one, because I scored a 31 and not a 99, so I'm sure that my recruiter was quite happy that I didn't ask him to be the next rocket scientist.
So the military provided you that structure in your life that you needed.
You said it. That's exactly it. The military provided the structure. My sister knew that. She knew that I needed that structure. I didn't know it. I needed structure and I needed discipline. 1998, the military gave John Arroyo, this young boy that was coming out of drugs and gangs, it gave me that structure and it gave me the discipline that I was looking for. But I often tell people, I didn't have to go look for it when I showed up.
Yeah,
It found me. There's many people that Navy SEALs and other special operations programs, you don't ever want to go to selection the first time because it is not something that you enjoy. Believe me, no one does. But I did it twice, and you guys heard me say that, and here's why. I went back there because I wanted my children to know that Daddy wasn't a quitter. And at this point in my life, I was now a stepfather to 2 additional kids. So not only did I have John Jr. in my life, but I now had Tia and Mason, and I wanted them to know that I wasn't a quitter. So U.S. Army Green Beret selection is known as SFAS, which is Special Forces Assessment and Selection. A lot of times there's movies out there on Navy SEALs going to selection. You have G.I. Jane, and it tells a story of them going to BUD/S. Well, in the Army, it's not told as much. There's not as much out there, but you got Special Forces Assessment and Selection, and that's Green Beret selection to see if you even have what it takes to go through their pipeline. Before I fast forward and tell you about being a Green Beret, I have to tell you that I didn't get selected that first time in selection. I made it 24 days all the way to the end, and the colonel looks at me and he says, John, we're concerned that academically that you're not gonna make it through the training program. So what he was telling me was nothing different than what I had heard the rest of my life. You just failed again. You don't have what it takes. I go back to selection a year later. I make it all the way through. I get selected, and then I go through the training program. And for the first time in my life, I made it through all the way without recycling or without failing anything. And that was a sense of accomplishment that it was for the first time in my life, I knew that with what was inside of me, I had what it took to do something great. So then there was an appreciation I had when I showed up in Afghanistan for the United States of America and what we have in this nation. This is a great nation, and you don't really realize it until you step out into another nation that's maybe a third world. And so here I am in Afghanistan. It's the first time my eyes are open because, again, I'm this young boy that had never even left Los Angeles before I ended up in basic training. My first airplane ride was on my way to basic training, and that was only a few years before Afghanistan. I started out as a truck driver. A lot of people don't know that. I started out in the Army as an 88 mic truck driver in transportation, and then I become a Green Beret. So, here you are,
Big
you're stepping
transformation.
yeah, that's a big transformation. You're going from transportation to the front lines as a
Right.
Green Beret. So I showed up in Afghanistan a little shaky, a little not as confident as I probably should have been. When I first went into Afghanistan, my grandmother gave me this bottle of anointing oil, and she says, "Mijo," I'm from California. You hear that a lot. "Mijo,"
Yeah.
she says, "Mijo, I want you to plead the blood of Jesus on everything and everyone." And I said, "Okay, Grandma." So here I am, this Green Beret. Jay, I had every weapon. In 2004, I had every weapon system known to man. I can call in bombs. You name it. We're in Bagram, getting our gear together, and we're told by the team that we're interchanging with. And they say, expect to get blown up, expect a hornet's nest. You're going back in the location that you came from, but it's not the same. That's not the same location. You're going back into a hornet's nest. So what did I do? I pulled out my weapon of choice, and I went to the vehicles, and I did what Grandma told me to do. I pleaded the blood of Jesus on everything and everyone. Here I am, I'm on the ground, and I hear, "Get up, your wife is gonna die." And I had a choice. We all do. And I think for many of us and many of you that are listening to this, it was easier to die that day. I could have stayed on the ground, and my wife would have known nothing different. They would have told my wife, "Angel, before John hit the ground, he was gone." I mean, because they would have tried to give her a sense of peace. Who takes a 45 through the throat and actually lives through it? I'm sure that maybe there's some, but there's not many. My faith journey on the day that I was shot, there's a story in the Bible that talks about a man named Saul who later had an experience that turned him into Paul. That was my experience. The day I was shot, I went from Saul to Paul. So my wife and I, we're in a much better place. I love my wife. She loves me. We're empty nesters. We don't have young kids anymore. We're good. But what began to happen in my recovery early on is I began to tell my counselors the truth about what I was going through. And I began to give them answers to questions that they weren't asking. What am I saying? They didn't know that my wife lost both her parents. They didn't know that she lost her brother. They didn't know that she's a former suicide, that she attempted suicide twice. They didn't know those things. So when they were helping me, in order to help a service member, especially where there's extreme trauma, you also have to take into account the family member. And for me, that was my wife. So my wife began to get treatment here at the Center for the Intrepid as well in counseling. And that's how she began to heal from her emotional wounds and the trauma that happened with her family, and also from what happened to me on Fort Hood. In my recovery, as I look back, here we are. We're near the 10-year anniversary. I can look back and I can see that there was a God from the foundation of the world that knew me as a young boy, knew that I was going to lose my dad and all the things that I went through. And I see the good majority of my life, I wasn't walking with him, but he was always walking with me. And I know that now. And friends, he knows you. That hopelessness that I had felt, feeling like a loser, never gonna make it, that's not who I am today, and that's not who you are. Why? Because the same Father that stepped into my situation is the same Father that loves you and wants to step into your situation. You're not in a hopeless situation. Look at me. I'm a survivor of a mass shooting, didn't have a dad, failed almost everything. And I'm here to tell you to get up because he loves you and he wants to step into your situation. He sent his son for you. You didn't send your son for him. He sent his son for you. Recently, I released the book titled, "I Never Heard My Dad Say." That book is really a reflection of me looking back on my life and realizing why I made a lot of decisions in my life. but it's also a tool that we're using today to go and to help people understand that, yeah, I went for years looking for a dad when the truth is I always had a father. There's no orphans. The truth is there's no orphans. And you don't have to earn God's love. You just have to receive it. And today, that's a tool that we're using all over the world in public schools. And we're letting people know that you are loved. And there are two things that I never heard from my dad. I love you and I'm proud of you. So friends, can I leave you with this? I love you and I'm proud of you. You know, there's a lot of reflection that you have as you look back as you're raising your own kids, and also I'm a man of faith. I'm a follower of Jesus Christ, and so, you know, David in the Bible prayed a lot of prayers, and he said, "God, search my heart. God, reveal my heart to me. God, give me a new heart." And so I did the same thing. I began to ask God to show me my heart, and He began to show me that I had a lot of wounds, and it wasn't from the military. And I know that we're going to talk a lot about my military experience, but a lot of the wounds that I carried, and I think a lot of the veterans that you tell their stories, it's the same thing. It's a lot of our wounds are not from war. They're from wounds that happened when we were children. And I really looked back and I reflect on what happened. And it wasn't that I grew up in a home where I was abused or I wasn't loved, but there was just a void. It was in my heart, and it was because I didn't have my dad in my life. So I'm on the ground, my life is pouring out. And Jay, what I didn't think about were all the things that used to consume my life. Before it was the titles and the accolades, because the world tells you, John, if you have this, then you've made it. John, if you have this much money in your account, John, you've made it. John, if you have these titles, if you have these degrees, you've made it. I didn't think about any of that stuff. The only thing I thought about when I thought I had seconds to live were the people that I sacrificed most. And it was my family.
Mm.
And what was I sacrificing them for? To fill this emptiness. Why? Because I was never affirmed at home by my dad. So I needed the world to affirm me. And what I did is I sacrificed my family so that the world can affirm me.
So what was it like getting out of the service?
I think transition for any service member is the scariest thing you can ever go through, because for 20 years, again, I was scared to go into the military because I was afraid of the structure and all that. But then when you become part of the system and you have that structure for years and it's time to get out, that's scary. And I think a lot of the veterans, that they struggle with transition. They struggle with getting out of the military. And the other thing is because that's community. And so I know leaving the military, I remember having anxiety attacks. I was scared because I began to think, this is how I cared for my family. This is how I took care of them. Now I'm going to lose that structure. And so there was some anxiety that went along with transition, but I'm not the only person that's ever transitioned. And
Right.
so the process was good. And I was able to make it. And
Is it finding that sense of purpose once you get out of the military? You know, you're over there, you're a Green Beret, you're an officer in the military, and you get out, and now it's finding that sense of purpose again.
it is. There's a lot of people that later, when their career is getting ready to wrap up, they knew they did this for 20 years, 30 years, and they're trying to find out what that calling is next. I would say after I got up off the ground, I knew that something inside me changed. Again, I didn't want to go after that Fortune 500. So I knew that I wanted to tell people about my experience and what happened to me. So I feel like I found a sense of purpose, but it's just like a plan when you get an idea. I'm sure that you didn't build this organization overnight. It was a process. And so that's what happened. I had to find what was truly the purpose and how I was going to walk that out. But it was scary still leaving the military and leaving the structure of it, because that's how I provided for my family. Now I'm stepping out, and am I going to be a public speaker? And that's actually what happened. So what I do today, Jay, is I share my story. I do speaking. I'm in the ministry, and I do a lot of public speaking to high schools and military. And I tell them what was told to me. I just tell them to get up. Hey, look, you're going to be okay. You may go through some things in life, but it's only going to be for a moment. Tomorrow, just get up. Now here I am, and I'm in a third world country getting ready to fight a war. And you begin to realize, man, we got it pretty good back home. We actually have it really good. But it was also a moment that I began to realize that there was something inside me greater calling me out. Is I remember we would be riding down the road doing our patrol presence, and I would be the gunner, and I would have a 50 cal in my hand, as I'm the gunner, and I'm holding on to this 50 cal machine gun. And these kids would be running alongside our vehicles and be asking for food or asking for candy. And I remember looking at these kids for the first time in my life. There was something that happened inside of me. And I began to weep. I began to cry as I looked at these kids. And I didn't even know why I was crying. Here I am, this Green Beret. Why am I crying? I didn't understand. And I remember throwing candies to these kids and saying, God, do something, change their life, make an impact for them. And that for me was an eye-opener that, man, we have a great nation, but we can really make a good impact in this nation as well. So after I had gotten home, my wife and we began to reconcile because she was going through a lot of mental and emotional issues because of my words. And we finally in 2009 hit rock bottom. And it was then that we needed to get rebuilt back up. And I get this great opportunity that most people don't get. Again, especially not some kid from Los Angeles that failed almost everything in his life, gets an opportunity to apply to go from an enlisted soldier to an officer. Wait a minute. Academically, this is the guy that failed almost everything academically or had to recycle to do it again. And I'm going to get this opportunity to be an Army officer that's going to be a leader and is going to lead troops. And I have an opportunity that could potentially take me from a private as an enlisted soldier all the way to a general officer. How does that happen? Well, that's exactly what happened. I get this opportunity in 2011. I apply and I get accepted. I go to college for 2 years because it was a 2-year program. What did I say earlier? I went to college some years ago because I wanted to do something with my life. Well, now that college that I had stacked up, it applied. And so I graduate from college in 2013 as an Army officer. I can't believe it. And here's what's amazing. Because I said it before, I didn't see myself as some academic giant. I was the guy that failed almost everything. But this is where the grace comes in. Here I am. I graduate college, and when I graduate with a 3.9 GPA, ranked number 80 in the nation among 4,000 cadets. So that's who I really was. It wasn't the drug addict. It wasn't the thief, the cheat, the liar. No. There was greatness inside of me. There was a man waiting to come out, a leader. There was a leader waiting to come out and to lead soldiers for his nation. And it took for men and women to call out, like my grandmother, like my sister. It took sergeants calling it out, the Green Beret leadership, seeing the warrior inside of me. And I often tell people, the Army didn't make me a Green Beret. They can't put the heart in you that keeps you moving. But what they did is they pulled the Green Beret out of me. It's the forged in fire process, right? You pull that block of steel out, you pound on it, you put it back in the fire, and eventually that block of steel becomes something beautiful. That's our lives. That's our story. That's my story. I'm telling you right now, I was the block of steel that was pounded on and put it in the fire, but eventually I graduate from college, and it's something beautiful. Not only am I an Army officer, but I'm also one of the most elite commandos in the world. I'm also a Green Beret during this time. So it's amazing. I graduate, and then we end up at Fort Hood. And some soldiers see me. One of the guys that saved me, he later told me, he said, John, we were standing behind this glass, and we were all watching you walk, and there were several soldiers. And he said, this is what alerted us to you. He said, it looked like you had a red scarf flapping in the wind. It was the blood that was actually squirting out of your neck. And he said this, and this is a profound statement. He said, one of the soldiers was looking through the window and he said, dang, that dude is bleeding. My recovery was a glorious time, but it was also a time of healing. And there were some significant people that helped us along the way. As a Green Beret, you're not used to letting people help you. You're used to being the help. it took a lot of pride for me to lay down to let people help me. That was actually part of the healing process. Well, one of the biggest things that actually helped me in my recovery is forgiving the shooter, is actually forgiving the man that shot me. And people would say, John, what are you talking about, forgiving the shooter? You want to know what PTSD, depression, anxiety, fear, alcoholism, rage looks like? It looks like unforgiveness. So when God worked on me and helped me to forgive the shooter, and then the second thing he asked me to do was to forgive myself, because it's hurt people that hurt other people. So when I forgave the shooter and forgave myself, that really made sure that I was healing mentally and emotionally. But along the way, there were people that helped me walk that path of forgiveness, helped me walk that path of healing. And that was George Torres, one of the mental health professionals that worked here at the Center for the Intrepid. It was going and meeting with Dr. Raul Marin and sitting there and discussing the physical issues and where we're going next. And most of all, it was my wife. Having my wife there, having my family. My family were the bedrock of my recovery, having my wife with me and us recovering together. And the truth is, you know, as a Green Beret, we used to do this training, it's care under fire. So, you know, it's like, hey, if you're ever in a firefight and you have to retrieve one of your buddies that's down, you have to neutralize that threat and then you got to go get him. Well, guess what? My wife was the one that was bleeding out and I had to go retrieve her. So we actually helped each other during our recovery process. What we had was each other, and that actually strengthened our bond. And when we put Christ in the center of it, that strengthened our marriage, not only our bond, because we needed the glue that was going to bring us back together. When you're broken the way we were broken, you're fragmented. So you need that bonding, that substance that goes in between to bring you back from brokenness to wholeness. And it was Christ. That was the bond that brought us back. And that's what was the substance of our healing.
What did it feel like when you actually were able to put that Green Beret on your head?
One, I honestly, it was life transforming because I had never achieved anything great in my life. To all of a sudden now I'm one of the most elite commandos in the world, and I put that Green Beret on and something inside me changed. And it was like I came alive. It was absolutely phenomenal because honestly, statistically, I shouldn't have been in that scenario. I shouldn't have been in that situation. Statistically, I should have been back in Los Angeles or in jail or dead, but I wasn't. I was now one of the most elite commandos. And when I donned that Green Beret, I knew that I was called to free the oppressed. And there was something inside of me, a sense of accomplishment. I remember looking in the mirror different times, looking in the mirror, looking at myself wearing the Green Beret in this sense, putting it in my pocket. What did that look like? But Jay, when somebody's bleeding, I mean, what are the first thing we do? We want to put pressure on it. Right. We want to stop the bleeding.
It's your neck.
I'm shot in the throat. So where were they putting pressure? On my neck, on my throat. And so as we're driving to the hospital, which is not a far distance, they're putting pressure on my throat. So I keep slapping their hand away.
Because you can't breathe.
Because I can't breathe. And so in that moment, I just remember closing my eyes and thinking to myself, like, just keep breathing, just keep breathing. One of the challenges that happened to me is in Iraq in 2007 is we were leaving a raid that we had conducted at about 2 a.m, and everybody's getting their gear, they're getting on the helicopter, and I'm on the door. And what happens is you have to get in and then you have to hook into the ground. There's little carabiners that you hook in. Well, because it was a quick exfil, I was getting on. Here's this little short guy. I'm 5'4", man. I'm trying to jump on the skid up, trying to get my little cheeks up on this, on the plane or the helicopter. And I get on, and everybody's wearing a lot of gear, right? So, I mean, everybody's got body armor, and these Green Berets are not little dudes, right? So everyone's big. There's not a lot of space. So I'm trying to get on, I'm trying to hook in, and the helicopter starts taking off, and I start yelling out, I'm not on, I'm not on. And somebody just grabs me, and the only thing that held me on is there's a little rope, there's a little line that we would hook, and it was like a safety lanyard that you put across. And I held onto that, and I held onto my weapon, and I squeezed as tight as I can. And then all of a sudden, the helicopter banked. Jay, I can't tell you what kept me in that helicopter. other than to say that I know that grandma was praying.
Yep.
I'll tell you a quick story. The first time I ever had an anxiety attack was in Afghanistan. And it wasn't because we were going to fight the enemy. It was because we were getting ready, because I had to face my peers. I'm this former truck driver, becomes Green Beret, and I wasn't super proficient at my job. And when I stepped into this Green Beret detachment, they knew that I wasn't proficient, and they knew that I was kind of rocky. And so they challenged me and they exploited it. And when there's blood in the water, the sharks come biting. And I brought that anxiety home with me, and I brought that tension, and I couldn't take it out on my teams, so I took it out on my family. Because here's one thing that I learned, Jay, that I had to face my fear and my pain. I had to deal with it. 30 days after I was shot, I went back to Fort Hood and stood on the very place I was shot. Why? Because I had to deal with my fear and my pain. And so that's what I'm trying to help people understand is in order for you to heal, you have to forgive people that have hurt you. That's what I had to walk through that process. I had to not only forgive the guy that shot me, but I had to forgive myself for hurting others because it's hurt people that hurt other people. But then I had to let people help me. And so I had to walk through these processes. And now I'm just walking people through the processes that I've walked through. And that's what I'm doing today. And helping them understand that they'll be okay if they just get up. You know, I have to say something to you, and I think this is important. I said it before, I'm a man of faith. I'm not telling you have to believe what I believe, but I believe that I wasn't shot to have a testimony. But I believe that there are bad things that happen to good people. But in that moment, God stepped into my situation and he asked me to get up. He gave me an option. And because I listened to him, because I followed through, everything I needed was exactly where it needed to be.
So aside from the physical wounds and changes that happened to you, what happened to you emotionally and spiritually?
There is a lot of who I once was that did die that day. I believe that some of me did die that day. The old John. There's a term, and some people that understand the Bible, they know that there's a man named Paul, and he started out as Saul, and he had an encounter with Jesus, and then he became Paul. So he went from Saul to Paul. That's what actually happened to me. When I got up off the ground, everything that I desired to be transformed. I no longer wanted to be the guy that went after the Fortune 500 and made money. What I wanted to do was begin to help people by using my scars and telling my story, because there's so many broken people out there. And I wanted to tell them, look at what we've been through. You're going to be okay. There's soldiers and first responders that are killing themselves. And if Angel and I could have been through all this and we could share our story and that will bring that person out of darkness, that's what we're doing. And so the money no longer became the thing that I focused on. It was the spiritual calling.
Well, John, if you don't know this, you are inspiring. Your story is inspiring. Your zeal for love and for life is amazing. And I see you and I feel that I fall so short. It's like, who can compare themselves with Mother Teresa, right? Well, I'm not saying you're Mother Teresa, but to me, you're close. So yeah, you're inspiring to me. And I'm honored to have you as a friend.
Why am I telling you this story? Why are we recording this? Why do I feel to share this with you? Because I want to give you hope. You're going to be okay. All you have to do is get up.